Amit Jani, welcome to ITV Gold. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, Aditi. I really appreciate it.
Of course, I have a whole set of questions today that I want to ask you, but I have to start this interview today with one of the biggest news that's happening in the nation. Something very unprecedented happened yesterday. I'd like to begin this interview with your comments on it, of how you're feeling and what you saw that happened at the Capitol yesterday.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, to me, it was absolutely shocking what we saw at the Capitol yesterday. Obviously, we had, a lot of folks who were Trump supporters. I mean, I think everyone was Trump supporters who came out there, but, it was extremely shocking to see that. I remember, I was working on Capitol Hill, and I believe it was 2013 when we had a lockdown. And I remember at the time, a woman had crashed at the gate of the White House and then was making her way up to Capitol Hill. So, we were in a similar lockdown, but to actually see, people, protesters penetrating the actual Capitol, being, on the House floor, the Senate floor, to be in Speaker Pelosi's chair, just to see, that mayhem. I mean, it was very discouraging. And, I think we're seeing that across the world. World leaders are condemning that. And it's very unfortunate to see a country like the United States, having to go through that. So it's very unfortunate, with our American politics today.
You worked really closely with the Biden campaign, so I have to ask you, President-elect addressed the nation before President Trump yesterday and basically condemned that behavior. What do you have to say about that?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think, President-elect Biden, as he mentioned yesterday during his remarks, he said this is an assault on Capitol itself, on our democracy. It's an unprecedented assault. And it's an assault on people's representatives, on the police officers sworn to protect them, the public servants who work at the heart of our republic. So, I completely agree with, what President-elect Biden has said. I mean, he's called for calm. He's asked, President Trump to, kind of disavow and step back a little bit and call for calm. So, I think this is a time it's, the politics is very heated. I think there's a lot of passions around here with a lot of different issues, and the election itself, obviously fueled by President Trump and, the misinformation that he's spreading. But it's really a time for us to really take a step back as a nation and calm down a bit and then, come together like President-elect Biden has said.
I'm sure you must have interacted with several members that worked within the Biden campaign, or maybe the members that are in their incoming administration. What were the sentiments like? What was the conversation like?
I think it was truly shocking. I mean, talking to friends, throughout the campaign, some of whom, are going to be joining the administration. I mean, I think across the board, I mean, even friends, who are working on Capitol Hill, and just across politics, both in Washington, D.C. and across the country, I think it was truly shocking. I mean, these are images, frankly, that you would see in, third world countries, but, it's really hard to imagine that right in our backyard, and a lot of my friends, they're living in Washington, D.C. and for them, it was really shocking. It was a scary experience. I know they were, locked in. I know members of Congress I've spoken to, they said they were hidden away. They barricaded the doors, of their offices. Their staff did as well. So it was really troubling images and scenario yesterday.
I have to ask you this at this point, do you believe this was an insurrection?
I don't know if it was an insurrection or not, to be honest with you. I mean, but what I will say is, I mean, I think it's very unfortunate that, President Trump and, those supporting him in the GOP party, have allowed for, this misinformation to go on for so long. And I mean, I think that's a direct result, the lack of responsibility that, as the head of the United States, at the head of a country, of a democratic country, it's a huge failure on his part and his administration to allow peaceful transition of power, which, we've seen throughout the history of our country. And this is truly unprecedented. So, I don't know if it's an insurrection or not, but, I do know this is a direct result of, the lack of responsibility that President Trump and the GOP party has shown.
And President Trump actually went on his video saying that he loves them, the people that were protesting. What kind of a message do you think this has sent across the nation?
I mean, I think we've seen time and time again, President Trump, unfortunately, has sided on the wrong side of history. I mean, I think you've seen his comments, during the Pride Boys, supporting them, many other, racist, and misogynistic groups and people, and to really be supporting, frankly, I wouldn't even call some of these folks protesters, to actually, trespass and come on to, and barricade the U.S. Capitol. Certainly, that's not a peaceful form of, any protest at all. So certainly, I don't think they're peaceful protesters at all, but certainly the violence has to be condemned. And I certainly think we need to take a step back and, calm tensions across the country.
The Biden campaign wholeheartedly supported Black Lives Matter movement when it happened in the summer. The way the law enforcement acted towards these BLM protesters was very strict. There were hundreds of arrests. There were barricades everywhere. However, when these protests happened yesterday, there was none of that. They were allowed inside the Capitol, and there wasn't enough law enforcement. How is the campaign and all of your friends in it looking at that, comparing those two protests?
Sure, and absolutely. And as you know, Aditi, a central point of this campaign for the Biden campaign has been racial equity. That's certainly something the president-elect has mentioned time and time again during his campaign on all fronts, whether it's social justice or environment, et cetera. I think it's going to be a very important issue for him. It's a very important issue as it is. He's been very outspoken on it. So I think, to answer your question, to see that inequity, you see these images of, police in SWAT gear, and helmets, and their full armor and shields, during the Black Lives Movement protests, and they're, fully across the Capitol. And to contrast that with the images you saw yesterday, where obviously the Capitol Police were overwhelmed and outnumbered. It was a stark contrast to that. And that goes to speak to the racial equity issues again. Frankly, I also think, I think folks were unprepared. I think, some of the law enforcement agencies like the Capitol Police, as much as they did a great job, I think, they didn't realize the scope and magnitude of the number of people and what they would actually be doing and trespassing. I don't think they expected that. And I think they were a bit underprepared, to face that. But certainly, I think the racial equity piece has to be addressed. And I know that's something the president-elect is certainly taking a close look at.
What's the expectation on this situation from the president-elect after January 20th?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think speaking to our community, obviously I was, I worked on Asian American issues for the president-elect. I certainly think that's, that the Asian American community is going to be a central focus for him as well. I mean, it's been so refreshing, seeing finally, a campaign and now president-elect taking interest in our community, which for so long has been ignored, and, you're seeing that in the appointments he's making. You saw that in the number of staff that he had, not only Indian American or South Asian, but Asian American as a whole. He had a number of senior members on the campaign. You're seeing that on the transition team as well. A lot of leadership from the Asian American, South Asian, Indian American community. And similarly, you're going to be seeing that with administration. Just today, you saw the release of the nominations for Merrick Garland as Attorney General. But along with that slate, you also saw Vanita Gupta, who was nominated to be the Associate Attorney General. And that's across the board. I mean, I think you look at Neera Tanden, for example, who was nominated to lead, to be the director of OMB. And, you look at positions in the White House, Gautam Raghavan, for example, he's helping to lead transition. He's going to be the deputy director for Presidential Personnel Office. You say Vinay Reddy, who's going to be the director for speechwriting for the president-elect. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy. So I think the list just goes on and on. But certainly, I think the issues that matter to our community, I think that will be something that will be focused on as well.
I'd like to know how the campaign reached out to the South Asian and Asian American community. I'm sure you must have had specific strategies. Whatever you're able to share with us, because I'm sure they're going to take these sentiments into their incoming administration as well. So what was the focus there?
Sure, absolutely. And as you know, and as your viewers know, the Asian American community, it's such a diverse community. There's over 50 ethnicities, over hundreds of languages spoken. different issue areas, priorities. So certainly it's not a monolithic group like so many, folks in the country may assume. So, it certainly is a challenging job that to really focus in on so many different communities. But, I think within that diversity, there's a beauty in it where, for so long we've been saying the Asian American community is going to be the margin of victory. That's always been our tagline that, every election, we're growing in number, we're the fastest growing racial group in the country. So, really being the margin of victory has always been a tagline in American politics for the Asian American community. But I think this time around, we actually proved it. And we actually were the margin of victory that put, President-elect and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris on top over Trump. This year alone, you saw in the early vote numbers, about 1 million API voters turned out, Asian American voters turned out. And that's 21% more voters than the entire 2016 API turnout. You saw the president-elect Biden, he carried the Asian American community by almost 2-1, right. Which is a huge margin. We had over 71% support in the community. And to directly answer your question, I mean, the way we did that was really coalition building. And that's something you saw President-elect Biden mention, Vice President-elect Harris mention, and that was really coalition building. And that was really one of the biggest, I know when I joined the campaign early on during the primary, that was one of the central tenets of the campaign was that, look, we need to really build a diverse coalition, but also a broad one that not only should we focus on African-American voters and Latino voters, right. but, really dig in and address the issues of not only the Asian American community as a whole, but also sub-ethnicities such as, South Asians or Indian Americans or, et cetera. So we essentially had about 14 ethnic affinity groups, everything from South Asians for Biden to Korean Americans for Biden, Vietnamese Americans for Biden, et cetera. And even within that, for example, within South Asians for Biden, we had Hindu Americans for Biden, Sikh Americans for Biden, Jains for Biden, et cetera. So I think that was a really great infrastructure on the grassroots level that really empowered, I think everyday people, in the community to really get involved, to really make a difference. Right. So I think that was a big part of it. Outside of that, we also had Asian American leadership councils in most of the key battleground states. So that was a huge help. I think the volunteer efforts were phenomenal. We had hundreds of super volunteers. And also for the first time in, American politics or presidential campaigns, or frankly, any campaign, we actually committed to 7-figure paid media and digital investment. Wow. So that was huge. And that was in language, so, that was really huge. So we really tried to pay attention. Oh, and one more thing, we also had campaign literature and materials in over 20 Asian American languages, wow. including over about, I think, 6 or 7 Indian languages. So, I just think it was that, focus to detail and really reaching people where they are, the languages that they speak, the communities where they interact, places where they shop. And I really think that grassroots kind of touch really put us over the top.
And when you interacted with them, did they feel that the Asian American voice was not represented or heard in the last couple of years?
I certainly think so. I think if you talk to, leaders in the Asian American community, I think elected officials, others, I think certainly they'll certainly say that, for far too long, the Asian American community has been overlooked, but I think that's starting to change. Again, there wasn't nearly as many people. I remember when I started in Washington, D.C., after college, I was working at HUD in the Obama administration. And, I didn't see a lot of people like myself, in agencies or, on Capitol Hill. And, now it's just so amazing to see the numbers and increase in numbers of folks from our community actually willing to serve in public office and politics. And to me, working alongside such talented people from our community, I have no doubt, it's certainly going to be successful and no smart part owed to our community.
Amit, when you're looking at the South Asian population and the Indo-Caribbean population particularly, would you say most of them voted blue this year?
I would say so. I think if you look historically, you look at the Indo-Caribbean population, the South Asian population, Indian population, I think we've always supported Democrats. And as a whole, we've largely been a part of the Democratic Party. I believe there was about 2 surveys released right before the elections, I believe in October. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it put the Indian American support for Biden and the Democratic Party at about 71%, which is obviously a very high support rate. So, and I think certainly that's just going to increase as we mature, as we get more involved. I think even if you look at the the generational gap, I think the younger generation of South Asians and Indian Americans, I think, are going to be even more progressive. So I think you're going to continue to see that rate increase.
Amit, you were the national API director for the Biden campaign. I'd like to know, what was your biggest struggle with your position in the campaign, and how much pressure was there on you to make sure that you reached out to these Asian Americans?
Absolutely. I mean, I think certainly, a lot of pressure on the campaign. Certainly it comes with the territory, but it was a phenomenal experience for me. I mean, being able to really represent, our community as a whole on the national level for, a leader that I truly believed in Joe Biden. I mean, it was really a privilege of a lifetime, and certainly, but there certainly were challenges. Again, I think the biggest challenge in my job was certainly, like you said, addressing each sub-ethnicity and making sure everyone felt the touch. So again, not just reaching out to the Indian American community, but making sure we're reaching out to the Japanese American community and Taiwanese and et cetera, et cetera. And again, people don't realize how big our community is. I mean, it includes Pacific Islanders, so, that was certainly the biggest challenge for me, was making sure that each and every sub-ethnicity, got that personal touch and felt like they were being heard, that their issues are being prioritized. And certainly at the end, I think, we did a good job of that, thanks to the many, hundreds of volunteers across the country that we had that made that happen. But certainly, I think that diversity certainly is both a gift and a challenge.
Georgia just turned blue fully, and there were a lot of states in the battlegrounds that turned blue this year. My question to you is, how did the campaign feel about this turning so blue, and how much, of the Asian American population helped them get this blue vote?
Absolutely. I mean, you talked about Georgia, and that's actually the most recent race I worked on right after the presidential. I was working to get out the Asian American vote in Georgia, and certainly seeing the results yesterday. I mean, obviously we talked about, the scenes yesterday, the horrific scenes, but I think in light of that, there's this, light at the end of the tunnel where we're seeing, we can actually make a difference. And certainly with Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff winning the Senate, I think that's going to make a tremendous difference. But I really think in the general election, I think the Asian American community played a huge role in helping not only Georgia to turn blue, but so many other key battleground states. I think, Arizona was the other one that really stands out as well. But Georgia, really, we really haven't had a Democrat as president elected from Georgia, I believe, since 1992. So that's phenomenal, seeing that change. And, we talked about overall numbers of Asian Americans coming out and the surge of Asian American voters. But in Georgia alone, API early voters exceeded their 2016 turnout by astounding about 60% compared to the 2016 cycle. And again, just seeing that sheer support for the Democratic Party and now President-elect Biden, I think that certainly, provides a lot of evidence that, the victory, both in the general and yesterday, had a lot to do with the Asian American community and the electorate.
I'd like to know what happened when the election results were finally declared. What was the campaign told? What was the momentum there? What were the statements that were given to you guys?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think, again, this was a stark difference from last cycle. I remember in 2016, I was actually at the Javits Center. I was there with my, my family and one of my closest friends. And, it was one of the worst nights of my life. And, ever since that moment, I always told myself I would do everything in my power to, help bring respect back to American politics and democracy, and to get Trump out of office. And so I think contrasting that to, this year, election night, certainly we didn't get the results on election night, and I think everyone was up late and I think just glued to their TVs. But I think as a whole, when we were told that Joe Biden was going to be president-elect, I think everyone was just so overjoyed. I think in a lot of ways we were expecting that. I think the campaign, certainly the guidance that was provided internally was, let's stay calm. We parsed through the data, the numbers, and certainly after doing that, we realized that, we were certainly going to be the winners. And so a lot of it was just having that patience, reassuring other people. I mean, every day people were reaching out saying what's going on, and just for a week straight, glued to their TVs. But within the campaign, we were confident that we had the votes, we had the numbers in the states that we needed. So for me, I think I was one of the few people that was actually calm. But I think throughout a lot, when it was announced that President-elect Biden won, I mean, it was just so electric. The feeling, everyone was calling one another, and it was just such a great moment in this time of COVID where we're apart. But it was great just connecting with everyone and seeing that energy and enthusiasm and just that optimism for the future.
Definitely. Amit, how was it personally interacting with the president-elect and the vice president-elect? And also, how did you think they treated, their team? Your opinion on how the experience was for them?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, for me, I've always been a big fan of, Joe Biden, obviously more recently Kamala Harris. But again, for me, when I was choosing, who to work for, which candidates I wanted to support, early in the primaries or even before the primaries started, Biden was always at the top of my list. And for me, it was because, he had such integrity. And after this era of, President Trump, I think that's certainly what we need, that contrast, that empathy, that ability to heal the nation, to work with the other side. So I think he possesses a lot of qualities that, I really wanted to see in a leader, in a president. And to be, to interact with him so close on many occasions. I mean, it was certainly, a unique experience. But certainly, I think with Joe Biden, he's, you see what you get, and certainly that certainly is Joe Biden for you. I memean, he's really, the way you see him on TV and interviews, that's really how he is in real life. I mean, he's such a caring person. I think if you met him, and if you had an issue or a problem, or just going through a dilemma, he would literally give you his personal phone number. And it was actually funny because he almost did that in a live national television interview. But he's that kind of person where, he's really empathetic, he cares, and he'll actually follow up, again, like you could tell him, if you're going through something, he'll certainly follow up with you. So certainly he's a great person. I mean, he's very empathetic, very caring. And certainly I think that's the kind of leader we need for our country. And then to talk about Kamala Harris, I mean, just unprecedented nature of her, the first Indian American, vice president elect. I mean, I think that's huge in itself. And again, she's similarly a very caring person, very enthusiastic, very energetic. And I think a good compliment to the leadership of, now President-elect Biden.
Yes, definitely. I just have two more questions left for you. While I still have you here, I have to ask you your opinion and your comments on President-elect's 100 days mandate. He has a full plan for the first 100 days. A lot of it has to do with tackling coronavirus, the pandemic that keeps on surging across the nation. How have you looked at it?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think, again, this is a very refreshing change where I think incoming administration or administration generally has a plan. And certainly, unfortunately, that's something we didn't, see in the last 4 years, and certainly something that's further, exacerbated, the COVID numbers and the deaths we've seen, unfortunately, in the United States. But for me, I mean, I think, certainly the policy platforms were one of the things I valued most during the campaign. I know in previous campaigns, a lot of it is just politics or, polling. But I think with the Biden campaign from early on, you saw that we had a policy platform for, many major issues, including for the Asian American community, as well as the Indian American community, which was also another first. So certainly, I think for Vice President and now President-elect Biden, COVID is going to be the biggest issue for him. I think during the campaign, several times he's issued many policy platforms related to different parts of COVID, whether it was, the vaccines distribution, whether it was education, getting kids back to school, small business loans or grants, et cetera. So that's certainly going to be a key focus in addressing COVID. I think in nominating Vivek Murthy to be the Surgeon General, I think keep going, right? That's going to be a big issue. The other piece is climate change. I mean, I think you've seen, the ramifications across the country, including in India, Pacific Islands, and other places. So certainly that's going to be another core issue. And then the third piece, which we talked about earlier, was racial equity. So I think those are going to be the three, key pillars early on that he's going to address, among many other issues.
Well, one thing is for sure, this new administration is inheriting a lot on its plate. It was so great having you here with us on ITV Gold, Amit. My last question to you is, I would love to know where your political journey is taking you next. I know you've worked very extensively with the Biden campaign. I know you've worked a lot with the South Asian American community across the country as well. What is next?
Well, right now it's just a lot of rest. Like I said, I was on the campaign for, well over a year. And as soon as the campaign ended, obviously we were focusing on Georgia, and that's where, I was, paying my full energies there. So right now I'm just catching up with some family and friends that I haven't seen in over a year and getting some rest. And, as transition continues to play out and fill out, I think, we'll see more. But, I'm certainly having conversations, excited to have been part of this journey, and really looking forward to the next 4 years in the future ahead.
Amit, what are your hopes for 2021?
I hope, obviously a COVID-free world, but, I really generally hope for less pain and suffering as a whole. So I would say generally, broadly speaking, that would be it.
Well, thank you so much for your time here on ITV Gold, Amit.
Thanks so much, Aditi. Appreciate it.